Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the latest LinkedIn Live from MIT Sloan Executive Education. I am thrilled to be joined today by my colleague Paul McDonagh-Smith, who is a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School and also our capability leader for digital learning in MIT Sloan Executive Education. So we're thrilled to have people joining from all over the world. This is a LinkedIn Live, and it is intended to be an interactive session. So I'm going to introduce Paul in a few minutes in a little more depth and then start a conversation with him. But we are really looking forward to hearing your questions and comments on the LinkedIn thread. So please do, if you see any questions on there, that have already been asked, see if you can come up with any additional ones or add to the thread. We'll see all of those coming in, and we'll try to get to as many questions that you have as we can. In the meantime, let me start by once again saying I'm Peter Hurst, Senior Associate Dean for Executive Education at the MIT Sloan School, and welcome all to this LinkedIn Live event. I am joined today by Paul McDonagh-Smith, who is a Senior Lecturer at MIT Sloan School, our capability leader for digital learning at MIT Sloan, and has, prior to joining us about a decade ago, I think, on our team, we can talk about that perhaps as the conversation develops. Paul was himself an executive for many years in the telecoms field, where he in fact pioneered the use of digital communication tools and using those for learning and other similar kind of collaboration activities, which is where Paul and I first met. Paul brought those tools into our MIT Sloan executive education programs, and then eventually joined our team. And after a few years of working with us on the business side of things, also became a senior lecturer and started developing and teaching programs as well. And so many of you watching will be familiar with Paul from his teaching and from his association with all of our digital learning capabilities and offerings that have been developed at scale over the last decade or more. So Paul, welcome. Thank you for taking time to share with us all your thoughts and insights on this topic today about generative AI and its applications in business. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure, privilege to be here for today's conversation. Thank you.
And if I may start with a bit of a low ball of a question. Today is a very exciting day for you and for us. You've launched a new executive education course in quite a new innovative format for us as well, where the topic is generative AI in business. The format is this new learning sprint that you and the team have been developing. And so before we get into more of the topic itself, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about that course that you've launched today.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you, Peter. And to steal your line, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are today. Thank you for taking the time to join us. So yes, Peter is referencing the generative AI business sprint that we launched a few hours ago, so kind of super fresh. And ultimately, this is, I think, an interesting experiment in the sense that, yes, it provides, we hope, a kind of a very engaging and insightful introduction to the topic of generative AI. But in terms of the actual learning experience as well, what we've actually done is we've gone with a model, quite innovative, hopefully, where we've built a 6-hour learning experience. And when you sign up, it's completely on demand. So whenever you wish to take this program, you can just sign up, and within 4 hours, we'll send you the links and you can access it. And this 6-hour experience, then you can either consume it as a box set, kind of take your weekend and go through it, kind of at your kind of leisure, or actually over a 30-day period, you can actually go through the content, go through the playbook, the assignments, the activities. We've included access to various generative AI models as well. We've also actually built in a virtual world, referencing Peter, my previous experience. So we built a virtual world and we programmed some generative AI chatbots in there so that participants can interact with the content, with the chatbots, and with each other, of course, if they bump into each other. But just to mention for a moment the actual structure or the narrative of the program, we've borrowed it from the whole concept, as you can imagine, from the agile methodology. So fundamentally, we start with a sprint goal setting, which in our case here is to decompose the topic of generative AI. We break it down into 4 of its kind of key questions. What in fact is it? How does it work? When can it be applied? And where is it heading? Okay. And so we use those decomposed questions to form the relays, the sprint relays that participants go through, that you'll all go through if you sign up to take the program. And we have, as I said, this playbook which allows us to track our progress as we answer these questions and learn from world-leading faculty on these kind of topics. So hopefully a very interesting and very 3-dimensional type of experience, and one that we hope is very much complementary to the conversation, Peter, you and I are going to have here today with our friends and members of our Sloan family.
Great, thank you, Paul. Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about that particular course over the next hour or so. But perhaps we could take a step back by a little bit. I'm sure if people have signed up for this LinkedIn Live or they're watching the recording, they all kind of are very familiar with what AI is and perhaps what Gen AI is, or perhaps they at least believe they are. But could you just sort of take us back to first principles for a second and sort of draw that thread from AI, artificial intelligence as a broad field, and what generative AI is, how it relates to the broader concept of AI?
Yes, Peter, I'll be pleased to do that. I shall only take maybe a minute or 90 seconds to do so, because of course we want to move on to actually kind of hone in and focus upon the applicability of all of this to our business and to everybody's business who's kind of joined us here today. But oftentimes, whenever we're talking about moving to a particular new destination or going on a journey, it's important to know where we want to get to, but also where we're starting. Yeah. And so I think there's almost, I would phrase it as a continuum, perhaps, that we've seen since the early days of the AI pioneers, Marvin Minsky, John McCarthy, all of these people in the 1950s, 60s, etc. We've seen a progression and evolution, if you will, from AI into machine learning, into deep learning, and now into generative AI, which one might argue is kind of the next step, or a kind of another step towards the AGI, artificial general intelligence type of progression that we and others seem to think we can move towards. And so what's interesting, I think, about this arc or this continuum is the way in which it's kind of developed and provided lots of opportunities for business applications. So I'd almost think about it almost like a casserole, or kind of cooking a dish of some sorts. That ultimately, as we move from AI into machine learning and deep learning, which is so incredibly important to what we're doing today with generative AI, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But as we've made this progression, we fundamentally kind of created a dish or a casserole with 3 main ingredients. And those 3 ingredients of machine learning, whichever type of machine learning model we actually look at, are the kind of definition of the task. So everybody, thinking about what is it we're trying to solve with machine learning, or what are we trying to solve here with generative AI? What's the data set that we kind of need to collect in order to be able to create this particular type of dish, if I may? And then the third ingredient being, well, what is the algorithm, or what are the algorithms that are going to learn from the data set to help us to actually solve the task that we've set? And I think as we look at this progression from AI through machine learning to deep learning to generative AI, one of the things, Peter, and everybody, that strikes me is that I find it very useful to think of machine learning as having the ability to move in 2 directions. I would argue there are 2 main families of machine learning models. There are those that focus on pattern recognition, and then there are those that focus on generative kind of models and generative AI. And what we're seeing really fundamentally is the one direction of the former, of actually moving in an analysis type of direction, where data is taken as input and analysis to produce labels and descriptions as an output, to a synthesis or generative kind of direction that we're in today, which is the opposite, in fact, where it takes the labels or the descriptions as the input and produces the data as the output. So what we're seeing fundamentally, Peter, is we've gone through this kind of AI journey, and we've arrived at a point where we're actually able to create data as the output, whether that be as text, as images, as code, as protein mapping with AlphaFold, and lots of different opportunities. And that's pretty important, because it means that whatever the type of data that we're feeding into this casserole or into the dish, we're actually able, with the various models that we've created and the evolution, to be able to create data of these different types of modalities, therefore creating the opportunity to generate, as we've seen so much over the last kind of 11 or 12 months since the launch of ChatGPT, but of course also before then.
Great. So just to summarize that, so there's one family of AI that in many ways perhaps we've been more familiar with is this pattern recognition.
Indeed.
Think about in our sort of almost self-driving cars, or the computer is looking at an image and describing or analyzing what's in it and telling us about it, and that's sort of like the classic AI. And then generative AI, what's different is we can describe the image that we want, and the system actually creates that image, or we can describe the text output that we would like to have, and the system takes a vast amount of information that it was trained on and generates potentially new, novel, creative output based on the questions that you ask. Is that right?
Indeed, yeah. And when we speak about it in these kind of terms, it's almost hard to appreciate the spectrum of opportunities that this provides. Perhaps we'll have an opportunity in today's conversation to talk around its applicability to all of our businesses. But this transition, or this change in direction from analysis to synthesis, is incredibly important, and is fundamentally, with various kind of developments in the architecture with transformers and different types of architectural kind of developments, really gives us a whole new kind of canvas with which to paint pictures for our organizations and our industries.
So what are some of the applications that you already have seen, or perhaps you've talked about, or our faculty colleagues have been talking about in this new course that's launching today of generative AI?
So yes, in the program that we're launching today, we've perhaps taken as a starting point the large language model type of focus that we've seen since ChatGPT kind of broke the surface last November. Hard to believe it's almost a year since that actually happened. But we've kind of used that large language model as a starting point from which we can then kind of jump on and move on to think about the ways in which different types of data modalities can be created and in fact combined as well with generative and foundational types of models. So starting with the idea of language, and almost in a sense, the same way that in previous technology generations or in innovations, we saw the introduction of a graphical user interface. Perhaps we're almost seeing a language user interface here that's allowing us to actually communicate with these machines and with these systems, with the data sets and the fine-tuning of the algorithms, etc., to be able to create outputs. We mentioned the video, the code, the protein kind of molecular structural kind of developments and models as well. So really a whole broad range of different types of data outputs, starting from this conversation around large language models in the program. And
these are sort of applications in some ways that you're describing almost sort of like from a software perspective. What are the kind of applications or business implications of those applications that you're already seeing?
Yeah, I think that some of the most interesting, I recently, and we can perhaps kind of, we include this in the program as well, a reference to a paper written by Eric Brynjolfsson, Danielle Lee, and Raymond here at MIT as well, around getting generative AI to work, or generative AI at work. And the early evidence is such that generative AI is going to have a substantial impact on organizations. So we saw in some of these papers, the kind of data and the research saying that for 80% of jobs, at least 10% of tasks would be potentially automated by generative AI, or also telling us that approximately 19% of workers may see at least 50% of their tasks impacted. So this idea of actually using generative AI to automate certain types of jobs and certain types of aspects of our roles is very important. It almost leads us to actually quite an important consideration around not looking at our roles or looking at our jobs at that level, but breaking them down into their component tasks and thinking, well, okay, and perhaps all of us can do this, just take a few seconds to reflect on this. If we think about the roles that we currently do within our organizations and break them down into their component or constituent tasks, which of those tasks do we think might potentially be transferable or automated to be done by generative AI? And very often, I find in conversations, Peter, with a broad range of companies and clients that we work with, and our learners, of course, that we're almost programmed ourselves to think in terms of the job versus the combination of tasks that we undertake. So thinking about the tasks perhaps gives us that first opportunity to think, well, okay, maybe we can look at X, Y, Z, or A, B, C as potential experiments or exploration around using generative AI to create almost productivity gain through automating certain activities and certain tasks that we do in our jobs, in our companies today.
So when you talk about automation, not to get too far into this kind of philosophical discussion, an economic one, but clearly it's very important, and it's potentially quite a concern for a lot of people that we might hear automation and think that sort of sounds like replacement. Could you share a bit about what you're hearing, faculty colleagues at Sloan and elsewhere who are thinking deeply about those challenges and those questions are saying about that? Is it replacement? Is it augmentation? And how should we think about that?
Well, I think, again, as you asked at the very beginning, Peter, sometimes it can be very interesting and very useful to actually take a step back and look over our shoulder where we've come from when thinking about these considerations. And perhaps, if I may, just for a minute or two, kind of try and do the same, but using the tool of paradox. And I'd like to share just 3 paradoxes that I think kind of begin to position the role of generative AI in an interesting way for our organizations and the tasks that we undertake. So a number of us from a computational thinking or computer science or data science type of perspective might have grown up with paradoxes such as Moravec's and Polanyi's. Moravec's paradox, where in essence, where there's the observation that oftentimes what's difficult for humans is easier for machines and vice versa. You know, the idea that a 6-month-old human toddler, from a perception and sensory motor skills, would kind of have great advantages over robotic kind of agents that we could build. It's incredibly difficult to build a robotic kind of agent that has the abilities of a 6-month or 1-year-old human toddler in terms of traversing various terrains. And so that kind of gave us a sense of kind of the roles and the jobs that humans and machines were kind of set up to do in our organizations. And then Polanyi's paradox, which is often summarized by the slogan, as humans, we know more than we can tell. And again, just reflect upon that for a second. We kind of almost know it's true without being able to explain all the reasons why. I could explain to you, for example, in great detail what I've got around my office here. But if I were to explain to you how I kind of dropped my daughter at school or something this morning, it becomes very difficult to do so, and hints really at the difference between explicit and tacit knowledge and the complications with regard to codifying that tacit knowledge. And if I may, kind of build upon these two paradoxes of Moravec and Polanyi, and make the point that there's perhaps a potentiality paradox that we're experiencing with transformative technologies like generative AI today, where if we imagine for a second generative AI to be a skyscraper in New York City or what have you, and the capability or the potentiality of this technology to actually reside on the 85th floor of this skyscraper. Well, if the potentiality is on such a high floor, let's all ask ourselves kind of frankly and candidly, well, what level and what floor is the user experience, the way that we're utilizing these technologies or this technology, generative AI, in our products, our services, and our platforms today? And I think if we were being honest, we would say there's a pretty big delta. We might not be in the lobby, but we're probably on the 10th, 12th, 15th, 20th floor. So how do we actually kind of get to that higher kind of floor and realize more of the potentiality of generative AI? And I would argue that kind of is dependent on boosting our creativity using a series of human capabilities and complementing them with the technical capabilities. And so this point, whilst we're talking a few moments ago with regard to the potentiality for automation of tasks, well, actually, it brings into play the opportunity for augmentation as well. What are the ways in which we can use generative AI to almost reimagine, reinvent, and actually restructure the way that we do work, the way that we think about it, and the way that we undertake our interactions with our clients, with our workforce, with other stakeholders in our networks. So I think on one hand, yes, we can see that there's a potentiality for automation, but again, there is this opportunity for augmentation. And the balance that we strike, or the recalibration of our kind of approaches within our workforce or to our tasks, is going to depend on a number of factors. And perhaps, Peter, as we go through this call, we can discuss kind of what some of those are and some of the ways in which we should be thinking and acting with generative AI as we move forward.
I really like your metaphor of the skyscraper, and a lot of people's expressed concerns. We see this sort of written around about a lot in the press and media, of course, including by people who are seen as kind of leaders and luminaries in the AI space and industries. The sort of artificial general intelligence that
Yes.
some might be more concerned would be replaced rather than augment. But using your metaphor, kind of, where are we? Are we, all of the tools that we're seeing developed in applications right now using generative AI? How far is that from? How far are we from this world of kind of general artificial intelligence?
Well, again, kind of looking back over our shoulder, I believe, and a number of kind of our friends on the call here today will have the specific kind of details of this. But kind of that summer in the 1950s at Dartmouth, when John McCarthy and Marvin Minsky and all of those people kind of gathered, they almost considered AI to be a summer project. That they would kind of get cracking on it over a summer of 2 or 3 months and expected to make a lot of progress. And I think various times, I remember having conversations with the late, great Patrick Winston, professor here at MIT and director of CSAIL, the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. And he kind of used to joke that over his 40 or 50 years in working in that domain, when people had asked that question, they'd always said, well, 2 decades, 10, 15, 20 years from now. So I think it's not so difficult to predict the future, but to kind of give a timing for when things are going to happen is incredibly difficult. And Peter, from the work that we've done together that I have the greatest respect for kind of technology futurists and what have you, but tend to think in terms of technology presentism. What are the things that we can actually do today? What are the ways in which we can make improvements 0.1%, 0.01% in our kind of ways of working, so we can have greater impact? What I would say, to perhaps be a little bit more concrete though, is given the speed of evolution of AI technologies and what we've seen in this kind of continuum, this arc, I think we can likely expect within the next 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 years to see some pretty remarkable developments and advancements. Now, the degree to which they would constitute artificial general intelligence, I suppose, is going to depend upon striking up a common definition of truly what that means. Being able to perform a series of kind of cognitive tasks to human or human-like or above human capability. I think we've already seen, haven't we, over the last period, that we're pretty good in a narrow type of band of creating capability, but the degree to which we're going to be able to create models that actually are able to move across different cognitive and different types of work, tasks, and abilities, that's still to be seen to a degree. So I think we should be very optimistic around the ways in which we can develop these technologies and generative AI and what it's going to lead to, and the way in which we can harness and kind of get closer to the 85th floor of the skyscraper so that we can help fix a number of the serious problems that we have and strategic kind of questions we have within our organizations, but more broadly in society as well. So I think it's definitely a case of each one of us becoming explorers, kind of paying very close attention to what's going on, but not only kind of looking through a window, Peter, at all of these technology developments, but becoming very apt and adept at experimenting, very comfortable with kind of taking ourselves into some new places, working with some new models, experimenting in different ways. And when I say models, but perhaps this is a very important point as well, the technology itself, yes, we have to have a certain dexterity, and we have to have people within our organizations who have, incredible capabilities in that area. But we also very much need to think about the business model and the business process innovation. So how are we going from a business model and a strategic kind of perspective to take advantage of the potentialities and the capabilities that these technologies bring? Peter, it may even mean, and everybody, it may even mean that we start thinking about different metrics of value, different measurement units for the way in which we go about our work. The moment in which, just a very simple example, the moment in which we start thinking of our jobs as a very real set of combination of tasks, then we're almost opening ourselves up for thinking, well, from a human and machine partnership, those tasks can be kind of outsourced to the machine. These ones can be augmented by the machine capabilities as well. And each one of us starts to have a slightly different relationship with the way that we undertake our jobs and our relationship with the things that we do on a daily basis.
So you're urging us to really focus on what's right in front of us, to be thoughtful about what the longer term implications and considerations could be, that we don't want to create unintended or unimagined or maybe even unimaginable currently consequences, but nevertheless, in the current time, there are real world applications and uses of these tools, and to look at them as tools. Is that right?
Well, I think my advice, and this is based on what I've heard from a series of CXO and CEO individuals over the last six to 9 months, is that there's almost a duality at play here. And this would be one of my kind of key lessons learned for myself, actually, over the last period, would be that there's a duality, almost somewhat akin to the Daniel Kahneman, the idea of the fast and slow kind of thinking. I think there's a duality here where it's beholden upon us to actually experiment, to get started, to move fast, to kind of look at those off-the-shelf type of opportunities, look at the models that are already out there that we can interact with, and we can perhaps start with proof of concepts in our organizations to actually to build an intuition for how they're going to be more useful for us kind of moving forward, but to actually kind of start to build our skill set and our ability, and to tweak and fine tune and recalibrate our processes and policies so we can work with this set of technologies as it develops as well. So that there's that fast element, but in this duality, I think there's almost the slow kind of part, the very deliberate kind of strategic considerations. And into that bucket, I would almost put things like considering the workforce kind of implications, our strategic implications, in the sense that working with these technologies, what does this mean for the things that perhaps that we can now do that we couldn't do before? Some of the what ifs, and also thinking about, well, realistically, are we going to be able to kind of work and harness these technologies all within our own organizational ecosystems? Are we going to need to partner with other groups? And, we've already seen, haven't we, with digital transformation, that it's a team sport. Well, perhaps with generative AI and kind of what's coming as we move forward with all of this, from a strategic perspective, understanding the partnerships that we need to build and the skill sets to be able to optimize those partnerships is going to be very, very important. So I suppose, well, I hope there's a certain pragmatism in this message, which is, yes, we need to kind of move forward. We need to start speaking the language of generative AI and understanding its broader kind of context and its broader capabilities. We need to do that in a kind of 1 month, 3 month, 6 month kind of set of experiments. But as a foundation beneath that, we should also be thinking of the longer term strategic implications and how we are going to factor those into where our organizations are heading. If that makes sense, Peter.
It does. And you mentioned there the topic of digital transformation, which we spend a lot of time about at the Sloan School and MIT, and we have a lot of courses that we've run with companies over a number of years on that. And oftentimes the concept of digital transform is kind of closely associated with our IT departments. Essentially, they both kind of drive and enable it. Is that something that you're seeing in this era of generative AI, that it's still something we should leave to IT, or is it something we need to be engaging with ourselves?
Well, that was a very leading question, Peter. Yeah, it's kind of thank you for that. No, I think it is that team sport kind of element that's going to mark the more successful organizations from those that kind of stumble a little bit more with these technologies. And what I mean by this is that in the conversations with leading organizations and people at various levels of seniority in those organizations over the last 6 or 9 or 12 months, it's becoming very clear, or coming into focus, that a cross-functional kind of approach is very important here. When we think about the potentialities and the capabilities of generative AI and the machine learning and deep learning and reinforcement learning kind of technologies that we're kind of building, when we're actually thinking about how we're going to apply them into our organizations, firstly, there's a diversity of perspective and thought and cognitive kind of direction that's very, very useful. I find it difficult to think that any one functional group within our organizations has all of the answers or all of the questions with regard to how we should be applying these things. But I don't think we're too far away from the days in which we're sitting around a table having these types of conversations with IT, with R&D, with finance, with legal, perhaps even with, some social scientists, some philosophers, some economists, a very broad and diverse group of people, so that we can be thinking around the ways in which we can almost create innovation that's a compound of all of these different elements. I think we would almost be narrowing or kind of predefining the impact that generative AI can have if we were to kind of limit it to one group. Don't get me wrong, IT, R&D, the technical kind of hemisphere of our organizations can be very important. But I think we should also recognize that generative AI arguably is a general purpose technology. Yeah. And I say that because the impact it can have on so many broad aspects of intelligence means that it's applicable I believe, to pretty much every function within our organization. So if we think about kind of the areas where we're seeing early adoption of generative AI and early kind of organizational benefits, we're seeing it in some of those areas of, for example, in contact center, some of the back office kind of areas where we're able to automate some of the activities. But we're also seeing it in sales and marketing types of areas where the pattern kind of recognition is being harnessed, but so is the content generation. And so I think as we grow and as we ourselves become better at prompting the generative AI technologies, as we become better at actually figuring out how to interface with them, we're going to open a whole new series of opportunities that are going to require a vast and kind of almost a rainbow of diverse perspectives in order to get the most from the technology.
So given that, you mentioned, you started listing out some different functions, sort of functional parts of businesses, as well as lines of business, where there are opportunities here. And you talked a little bit about what the breadth of different kinds of industries and organizations and sort of application spaces are as well. So if there's something here that everyone should be really, getting to grips with and thinking about, what's your recommendation on how people should get started with that, particularly where there are still, I think, many concerns. When I mentioned IT and you mentioned legal, we do read about people being concerned about, can I sign up for any of these services? How do I learn what they are, and how I might be able to use them in my job or in my role? What are you advising people who ask for your help with that?
Well, firstly, and this might seem a little bit strange, I'm kind of advising an optimistic and positive state of mind with regard to all of these kind of potentialities. As I kind of mentioned before, we're kind of living through a period of quite serious organizational strategic challenges and societal kind of challenges as well. And I think I, for one, would be a lot more concerned about our ability to frame and fix some of these problems if we didn't have the AI kind of tools and generative AI tools that are coming down the road. I think we've seen with previous technology introductions that it's completely natural and a completely part of the human condition to be somewhat concerned and to have reservations about the changes that are coming. I think it's important to experiment. My starting point would be, as I kind of said before, to roll up our sleeves a little bit and start interfacing with the technologies. And a lot of us, I think all of us, the vast majority of people on this call will have played around with large language models, with ChatGPT and others, whether it's Bard or kind of any of the other kind of models that are out there. But I would also recommend kind of digging a little bit deeper, or kind of looking in some other places. So Google's DeepMind, for example, if you go to their website, you can actually interface with the AlphaFold protein molecule protein folding kind of model. So you can actually see some of the capabilities of this technology in the sense that you can, for a protein like related to Alzheimer's or SARS or E. coli or hundreds of different types of proteins as well, you can actually enter that into the model, build that, have a view of the 3D picture, start to navigate around it. Now, I, for one, am not kind of a biologist. I can't pretend that I would understand the details of what's available there. But directionally, I think it does something very important. It almost shows how these generative AI tools are building on a massive body of work that scientists painstakingly have completed over a period of 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. It also shows in the sense that it's open source and it's available. Almost this spirit of trying to to do good while doing well, if I may put it that way. That almost this desire and this kind of focus on doing something positive for our societies, for our organizations, and in the way that they've gone about this, actually sharing that for the common good. Now, of course, a lot of the things that we do in each of our organizations have commercial sensitivities. So I'm not pretending for a moment or intending for a moment that we kind of put everything out there. But I do think it's important that we build almost again that duality of kind of what are the problems that we need to solve and kind of work towards today, but what are the ways in which we're going to use that information to help us as we move forward as well. And so I think going to the DeepMind, there's lots of different kind of models that are available there for climate, meteorology, as I said, AlphaFold for molecular kind of structure of various proteins, etc., and how they three-dimensionally fold, gives us this broader perspective than only the large language models that I, for example, generally kind of interface with. So having that broader perspective, I think, gives us a bigger place in which to play and greater space to think about, well, how indeed does this fit into our organizations, into our reality? How can we actually build an intuition for how this could be useful? So again, my advice would be to roll up our sleeves a little bit and start working with these, start playing around with it, but almost in the spirit of the scientific method itself, where we conduct that exploration. As we do so, we start to build a bit of an intuition or a hypothesis for kind of what might be useful. So then we conduct an experiment. So think about the ways in which we can conduct, or we can all conduct experiments that use language models, that perhaps use other generative models, whether they be for code, whether they be for audio, whether they be for molecular type of activities, and actually get the data from those kind of experiments and decide then where we want to go to next. I think the sooner that we all kind of move forward with our experimentation, the better and the more equipped we'll be to take advantage of these technologies.
I think that's a very significant point that you were just describing there. You know, people in the chat have been asking, you know, can we be specific about areas of application and types of application? And I think one of the things that you're almost answering that question with another question, which is, you know, what areas is it not relevant to as you put it, a general purpose technology? And I think that was a really helpful perspective as well, to remind us, as much as there's a lot of hype about the large language models and being able to sort of generate text and those kinds of outputs, that there are really many other kinds of content in many other different sort of businesses and industries and applications that this fundamental technology can contribute to that as well. So with that breadth, do you have any signposts, any kind of guidelines to people for where where do we start thinking?
Well, again, and apologies if this isn't kind of earth-shattering, it's kind of just almost that digital presentism type of idea around kind of what are the things that we can do today to start enabling greater opportunities and potentialities for tomorrow. I would be inclined to kind of position very squarely three questions that each one of us should be asking really in our organizations. So question number one, is our data AI or Gen AI ready? Yeah. Do you remember when I spoke about the casserole kind of dish, the three ingredients? Well, the bottom line, as a number of us who experiment and kind of work with these AI technologies, we've got to have the data. Yeah, you've got to have a data strategy that's going to be supportive and give you the opportunity to create value and impact. Okay, so question number one is your AI data ready? Secondly, are your AI people ready? Yeah, and there's two dimensions to that as well. One is kind of the technical capabilities, but secondly also the cultural kind of element of this, because we've entered into an era where, frankly, from a technology perspective, that there is no kind of endpoint. Every couple of steps we take forward, the horizon kind of shifts another couple of steps further away as well. So our people have to be very comfortable culturally with that journey, with setting almost a North Star and moving towards it, and exploring, experimenting, picking themselves up off the floor when things don't go the right way, and continuing and developing and growing. And then the third kind of question that we would be asking is, well, are our processes, our strategy AI ready as well? Because my argument here would be that if we've developed our kind of strategic direction for the next 1, 3, 5 years in our organizations based on a series of technologies that now have been enhanced and improved, well, shouldn't we also be enhancing and evolving the strategy as well? So to take a couple of steps back from the mosaic of all of this and think, well, okay, given the potentiality of these technologies, what are the strategies? What are the policies and the processes and the practices we're going to require to be able to achieve this? So those would be kind of the three questions I would ask of everybody, and definitely would ask of ourselves as well, Peter, here at MIT.
Great, thank you, Paul. And I'm going to turn, if I may, to some of the questions that have been coming in the comments as we've been talking. And this might be a little bit of a quick fire round for you now. First up, we touched a little bit on this, but Mita De Leon is asking whether you could share from your perspective, what are the ethical implications of AI? And if I can add to that, not only what are they, but how should we, what should we do? What should we be doing about those ethical concerns, if there are concerns?
And firstly, I'm so pleased from me to have this question, because it shows it's already on people's minds. Okay, so the first thing to be doing is to be thinking about these types of considerations and the implications for the ethics of our organizations and our interactions with these technologies. So I think we should be deliberate and thoughtful to begin with. One of the dimensions, or one of the aspects of the answer lies, I think, in the cross-functional kind of diversity point that I made earlier, to make sure that, do you remember again when I mentioned about the casserole, the first kind of ingredient, well, what is the job that we're solving for? Well, what is the thing that we're trying to fix? What's the task that we're identifying and determining here? So even at that early stage of the process, to have individuals and considerations from our organizations shaping the tasks and how we're going about them. So I would very much be a proponent of kind of not abdicating our human responsibility when it comes to working with these algorithms and with machines. So I think a diverse approach from the discovery phase and very early on in our processes is going to be very important. And then I think from an ethical kind of perspective as well, we might want to kind of recognize some of the patterns from other industries or other generations of technological kind of development, whether that was with nuclear power, whether it was in the communication space that I worked in, where kind of cross-industry standards and kind of relationships were built between the most important stakeholders, including government and kind of the actual developers of these technologies, to ensure that what we're building is in the best interest of humanity as well. We saw recently, didn't we, that there was that kind of letter that was signed by a series of kind of AI luminaries, Demis Hassabis, others, et cetera. And what I took from that was a consideration, broad consideration and appreciation that we need to be deliberate and mindful of the way we're developing these technologies. We're not saying to press stop, but we are saying that kind of a bull in a china shop type of approach isn't really going to be the right way to move forward here. So having some transparency, having some oversight, having some engagement at an industry with government kind of visibility and potential participation, I think is going to be very important. As we move forward, as I mentioned earlier, that philosophical position of kind of ethics and morality and these questions that have always underpinned kind of technological innovation, I think are going to come to the fore, and we'll see in a number of, if not all of our organizations, seats at the table for individuals and experts with those skills.
Thanks, Paul. We've had a few questions as we've been talking that are very fascinated by the discussion and still looking for more specifics. And as I'm looking through, I saw quite an interesting take on that from Neil Milan, who made the observation that perhaps one of the areas of opportunity with Gen AI is that it might enable us to engage in practices or aspects of our businesses that didn't used to be economic.
Yes.
But now they are. So do any examples come to mind of that sort of like something genuinely as a new opportunity in a business or organization that's coming from that fact that things that didn't used to be economic could now be economic given the capabilities of these systems?
I think it's a great point, isn't it? It's kind of I often term this as almost minding the gap, kind of making sure that when you're transitioning kind of to new technologies, you're kind of looking beneath your feet at the opportunities that you kind of might be missing, etc. I think it would be a very kind of interesting practice to kind of, from a strategic perspective, to look at kind of your scenario planning, the strategy setting for the last 2 to 3 to 5 years, and look at the opportunities, the what ifs, the potentialities that were kind of turned down, because it may well be that with these technologies, particularly given the ability to both automate and augment, that there might now be plausible, there might now be viable, there might now be economic. But because of course, what's happening here is that when we're lowering the unit cost of production by automating in our organizations, we're creating an interesting kind of scenario where we have a choice of how we now use that benefit. Yeah. Do we want to kind of, from a production perspective, create more or create the same with kind of less resources and then use those resources for other activities? So I think my advice would be to take a couple of steps back and look at the patterns of the way in which our strategy has been developed over the last 1, 3, 5 years. And what were those things that we really wanted to do, but kind of just couldn't, either because a productivity kind of issue, cost type of issue, resourcing issue, et cetera, and see if now, given the capabilities that we're experimenting with and exploring with generative AI, that they become more possible.
That's helpful. And just to sort of hold your feet to the fire a little bit on that, can you suggest any specific examples of that you've been hearing about, or that maybe some of the faculty that you've been working with at MIT in these new programs have been working on themselves?
I think one example, if I could kind of lift it from product and service development, okay, around the ability that generative AI gives us to understand certain patterns and to be able to build upon them in a way that our human resource wouldn't have been able to with the time they had at their disposal. So looking at the patterns of sales, of preferences of customers, of markets, of market segmentation, and saying, well, there's an opportunity there that we just weren't able to exploit before, and kind of being able to find it quicker will now allow us to actually kind of push forward in product development or service development in a certain kind of area.
Great. I'm going to take a different tack here because I should have predicted this. Ahmed Ali writes, I asked ChatGPT to generate a question for this.
Oh dear.
And here's what ChatGPT generated, quote, exploring the nuances of generative AI, how do you envision this technology influencing not just product or service innovation, but also the fundamental structure and decision-making processes within organizations? Are there unconventional ways generative AI might reshape the business paradigm beyond the commonly discussed applications? And while you think about and answer that, I'm going to invite Ahmed to ask ChatGPT to answer its own question and see how.
Okay, let's run a little experiment. Okay, so while kind of Ahmed is doing that, I'll kind of give my answer. We're going to see how different it is from the answer that he actually gets. I think one of the exciting kind of opportunities here is if we take on board this idea of being able to generate and synthesize data in so many different modalities. Add to that the fact that we will need to have these cross-functional teams to be able to realize the potentialities and kind of create the diversity, take advantage of the opportunities. We might reasonably expect that over the next kind of 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 years, the fundamental kind of structure of our organizations will change. Okay. In lots of organizations over the last 15, 20, 25 years, we've seen them characterized by, I wouldn't so much call it siloed kind of areas of the organization, but definitely along functional lines. I think that's going to become more blurred, as is the line between the inside of our organizations and the outside of our organizations. The jobs that we do within the four walls of our organizations, and the partnerships and the coalitions we have to get jobs done outside. And when I say all of this, I don't just mean between humans and humans, I mean between humans and machines. I'm very struck by something that Noam Chomsky has said around language. And bearing in mind that we kind of started this conversation around large language models and all of that, perhaps it's apt to kind of mention this. The idea that the principal function of language is not to communicate, but rather to link interfaces. And I think generative AI and the next generation of multimodal generative AI models are going to bring some pretty intriguing opportunities to link interfaces. And those interfaces are going to be human, but between the people that we interact with in our organizations already, but now kind of a whole new series of people as well, but increasingly with machines in this recalibrated human and machine partnership. So I think to answer the question, we might reasonably expect an organizational design that's very, as well as organizational capabilities, that are markedly different from the ones that we have grown up with and experienced over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Great,
so
thanks.
See what the answer was from ChatGPT.
We'll see that in a minute, maybe. But can we be really specific about generative AI? It's so easy in these conversations to, I think, still be thinking about AI more generally and sort of, as you mentioned, sort of the interfaces and the multimodalities and that kind of thing. But specifically in relation to the generative AI tools that we see in the market, at the moment. You talked about being a presentist. What are if you had to sort of list the 3 to 5 really top business applications that people could or should be working on or thinking about right now that are specifically about generative AI, whether that's the large language models or systems that are producing visual outputs or other things that you haven't talked about. What are those examples, those business uses of generative AI?
And to a degree, these kind of represent and reflect kind of where we are experimenting as well in a lot of organizations that I work with. So if I think across the broad domain of industries that we've been working with over the last 6 to 12 months, I see the ability to create chatbots as a very important. The ability to automate and accelerate software development as being very important. For content generation, whether it's in sales or marketing or finance or legal, to deal with a lot of that documentation type of thing, and to recognize, to undertake patterns, to undertake experiments that recognize the sales patterns of our organizations over the last period. So I think Peter, they would be 3 or 4 of the main areas that, if we were thinking about embarking upon proof of concepts and small experiments tomorrow morning, would perhaps dominate kind of the thinking of where we would kind of make that initial investment, whilst that duality of thinking, okay, the results from those experiments are going to feed in to actually helping support the strategy development over a longer period. You know, what are the lessons that we're learning from these experiments that can then be fed in to creating a strategy that's kind of coherent and robust and sustainable as we move forward. But if we don't start experimenting, and we don't ask ourselves those questions around the data being ready, our people being ready, and our strategy being kind of in the right place, then I think we're kind of leaving it. It's going to be a bit haphazard, and we can't expect to realize as much potential as we would wish.
So you just talked about examples there that I would characterize as being, you know, business opportunities, and that, to be fair, was the question I asked you. But perhaps in closing, we could sort of turn back to the human side of this equation, and for, you know, all of us as individuals. You know, do you have any top tips of what we should really be doing to prepare ourselves for what's coming, and also to be making use of them right now in ways that perhaps many of us are not yet doing?
The piece of advice I find myself giving the most is perhaps one that kind of causes people to kind of recoil a tiny bit, yeah, which is we have to, I think we have to, each one of us has to find a way to build some time into our calendars to reflect and to think and to explore. We're all very busy, aren't we? And we have very much, we have daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly kind of deliverables, etc. But given that I would argue that we're going through a period of punctuated equilibria, the realities that we're going to experience and the opportunities we're going to have over the next 5 years are not a linear extension of the ones that we've had over the last 5, that we need to carve out some time for us to make sense of what is going on around us. And to do that, we almost need to become like, I suppose, almost like elite sports professionals who, irrespective of their success in kind of their chosen kind of sport and their ability and their natural talent and everything else, they still kind of turn up for work every morning, trying to get that little bit better. They explore, they look for new opportunities. And so I think I would recommend visiting these kind of the websites and the kind of software development kits and kind of models of these large organizations, whether it's Microsoft or Google, or making sure that we're actually touching the technology and thinking about its relationship to the way we work today, thinking about what actually is our jobs, what are the tasks that kind of our jobs are composed of, and those around us as well. So we can think about, is there a way to break this down, to decompose it, and start thinking in terms of automation, start thinking in terms of augmentation as well, and starting to create a bit of a space in which we can explore and experiment, because ultimately it's about giving yourself the permission to explore and experiment, but also passing that on to everybody who kind of stands within our shadows as well, and creating that culture where it's okay to be exploring and experimenting, but also kind of communicating the results and the data and the kind of direction that we need to take with all of this.
Great. Thank you, Paul. You know, we've been getting so many questions, and I'm afraid we're more or less out of time, so we don't have the ability to get to all of the questions that are coming in now, but we'll try to address some if we can offline. But thank you, Paul, for spending this time with us on behalf of everybody who's been watching. It would be remiss of me not to mention once again that you have today launched in partnership with the Schwarzman College of Computing at MIT, this new business sprint on sort of understanding and applying generative AI. It's a very rapid way to investigate some of the questions that we've been talking about today and get a hands-on experience of what Gen AI is and what it could mean for your business. So any last thoughts about the course, which again launched today and is available on demand, so people would be able to leave this meeting and jump right into that if they wanted to keep learning?
The point I would stress is that what we're trying to do with this is kind of strike a balance between our kind of life, learning and work kind of commitments. And so in creating an experience that you can consume, you don't have to wait to a particular date till it starts. You can kind of sign up whenever you're ready. You complete it within any time within the 30 days. And hopefully we're trying to give you that flexibility, that kind of almost a starting point for your own continuing experimentation and exploration, and really an entry point, and kind of from which we think, now I know which steps to take, where I can move to next, and really begin to embark on a journey for the next years that's going to take you to some really exciting and really impactful places for your organizations and for your career, but also individually. I think kind of a way to channel your curiosity. So we'd love to see you on the program, and thank you.
Thank you again, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And it just remains for me to say goodbye from the MIT Sloan School, from this LinkedIn Live event. And we hope we'll see many of you in this and other courses and future online live events and webinars brought to you by the wonderful MIT Sloan Executive Education team. Thank you, team, for putting this together. And I look forward to continuing this conversation. Paul, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody.